There is another silent pandemic that's been raging, and that is of mental health conditions. 14% of all Indians have a mental health condition, and that is probably underdiagnosed. This could have a $1 trillion impact on the Indian economy in a 20-year period, according to the UN. But, as a wise woman has said, statistics don't change people's minds, stories change people's minds. So we have Aparna's story. It's an epic story of triumph, of her spirit, her struggles, and her sensitivity. And through that, she has distilled lessons which are valuable to other people with mental health conditions, practitioners, their caregivers. It could easily have been a project of self-aggrandizement. It could have been a vanity project, but it is instead a project of service, a project of giving. I think it's going to shape a conversation, spark a movement, and change people's lives. And ultimately, to me, it's a book about what poets and philosophers, priests, and people like you and me are thinking about, constantly grappling with. What gives life meaning? How do we find purpose? How do we find happiness? And we have a stellar panel to help us interrogate some of these questions. Mr. Ajay Piramal, the chairman of the Piramal Group, a philanthropist and a trusted partner of the Indian government on developmental projects, and a deep thinker about spirituality. Mr. Narendra Kinger, a psychotherapist and psychologist, practicing in Bombay for 35 years, the founder of Talk to Me, a mental health NGO, seeking to make mental health accessible and affordable to all. Aparna, of course. My name is Richa Roy. I'm a lawyer and a close friend of Aparna's, have had the honor of witnessing her journey. So let's start, Aparna, with the quote that your book starts with. It's a funny line. It says, "There is a pleasure sure in being mad, which none but madmen know." And then there's a slightly more somber line. "Tread all the powers of darkness down and win the well-fought day." To me, this is emblematic of the rest of your book and also of your life and your approach, where you treat an issue of gravity with levity, with a lightness of touch, with wit and humor. Why do you do that? And how do you do that?
I don't know how I do that, but why I do that, I think I saw a video on YouTube by Swami Chinmayananda, and he said that life is a tragedy for those who feel, and life is a comedy for those who think. Now, somebody who feels a lot, then I said, I don't want to be living in a tragedy. I'd rather be living in a comedy. So, but of course, what he's referring to is there's a deep, science of Vedanta and body, mind, intellect, and understanding the difference between the two. And I just think that if you can take life seriously, but you don't take yourself so seriously, because we're just tiny, right? Like we're just so small, right? So you have to kind of take life seriously and things that happen in life, but not take yourself seriously has always been my philosophy.
Right, no, absolutely. And I think Indian spirituality also has grains of this. And I'd love to hear from you, Mr. Piramal, on this, because I read in the book that you gave Aparna her first copy of the Gita. The Gita is a scripture that talks about disciplining the mind, calls the mind a naughty monkey in places, that same sort of playful strain. What do you think is the role of spirituality and scriptures in mental well-being and kind of dealing with darkness?
I think we should just appreciate where the Gita was spoken. The Gita was spoken first by the Lord in the midst of a battlefield to a young person, Arjuna, who was not even 30, and who was the most skilled archer of his time. And yet, normally when you have a book which is written on spirituality or where you speak about spirituality, it would be probably in the Himalayas or somewhere in the forest. So why was it spoken right in the midst of all this? I think there's a purpose behind it. The purpose is that it is a lesson for all of us. What Aparna said actually in the introduction, it struck me. It's not for the 1% who are affected, it's for all of us. So this is a book which was given for all of us. And what was the condition of Arjuna, which almost all of us go through sometime in our life? He was scared because he saw such a big army on the opposite side. He was depressed. He had just given up. He surrendered his arms. And then he was finding a lot of reasons, and he gave a lot of logic. Nothing of it was really, it was logical, but it was all, behind it was the fear, it was the depression. And then at the end of it, Krishna brings him out of that depression. So in some ways, it relates to all of us. Every day we go through it. And the other thing to remember is in this, that though it is the Lord himself who is the charioteer of Arjuna, or who is his best friend, but Arjuna has to make the effort to come out. It's not that you can sit back and say, okay, the Lord will look after me. And second, as important is that he goes through a lot of difficulty. It's not an easy battle. So in spite of all this, so I think to me, that's a big lesson for all of us. And if I see Aparna thriving today, it is just another example of what has been taught in the Gita.
Wow, the Gita is a mental health text. That's so wonderful. But I've also seen
it is the world's best anti-depression manual, I think. Seriously.
Actually, there are so many times it is the most optimistic thing. He assures you of so many times, and he also says, do not grieve. That is the standard line in the Gita. At least more than 50 times it's said that you have to be optimistic.
Right, and it's fascinating the kind of uses you can put the Gita to. I've seen you use it in negotiations, in business negotiations, so I'm looking forward to your book on that topic. Aparna, I'd like to kind of double-click on the title a little bit, if we may. Chemical Khichdi. So you're acknowledging the role of brain chemistry and physiological roots to mental illness. You say that when you first got your diagnosis of bipolar, they de-linked your personality from the mental health condition. I think you also say that there are psychological triggers that lead to chemical imbalances. Can you tell us about the interplay between the medical and the psychological?
Yeah, I think that if I haven't slept for 5 nights in a row, then there's going to be a chemical imbalance unless I address it. But if what is keeping me awake for 5 nights in a row is a psychological issue.
Absolutely.
But I think the title also has something to do with Munna Bhai also, to be honest. He talks about chemical locha.
And khichdi is kind of a nourishing thing.
Yeah, khichdi actually can be nourishing, so it's both ways. No, but I think the title was to say it was an acceptance of the fact that there is a chemical imbalance, and this is not something that's,
It's not a personality
It's not
defect.
a personality thing, yeah.
Absolutely. Mr. Kinger, I'd love to bring you in as a practitioner. We see that it took Aparna 10 years to first start medication. Why do you think people struggle so much to go to a psychiatrist or to go to a psychotherapist, which is another important pillar of the medical treatment?
So before I answer your question, I think to me, khichdi is food for the soul. So I think chemical khichdi is in a way, I think it's connected to your mind-body connection in that sense. So I think really it's a very wonderful title. So to answer your question that why do people take time or why does it take so long for us to reach or seek help, and especially mental health issues, I think there's a huge issue of stigma in our country. We are afraid of being mocked, we are afraid of being made fun of. When we don't understand something, when we have complex issues at hand, it's easier to just bury your head in the sand and not look at it. So I think in that context, there's a whole thing of shame, stigma, what will people say, things like that. So that's one of the first aspect of why people don't seek help. Second role, I think, which is covered in Aparna's book, which is in a positive way, that her family actually supported her. I think in a large number of families, sometimes the family doesn't support somebody who's going through a mental health condition. So I think in our Indian context, and we live in a family system, the family has a huge responsibility to support people who are going through mental health conditions. So if you have a supportive partner, you have a supportive parent, you have supportive friends, you have a supportive teacher, I think it's easier to seek help. The second part is lack of mental health awareness. So a lot of us don't really understand. So mental health is sometimes called the invisible illness. Okay? So if you have fever, you can touch your forehead and you can actually measure it's 103. But the bipolar mood swing that we talk about, or the depression, etc. Of course, there are tests which we measure, but many times people don't really understand. This word depression is used commonly in day-to-day language. At the same time, it's a medical illness. We need to understand that. And the third part, I think, is that when we look at a lot of young people, we are actually taught to be self-reliant. From childhood, you are told that, take care, grow up, be a man, take care of yourself, so on and so forth. So I think we actually, a lot of young people hesitate to take help, and that's the third part. So stigma, wanting to be self-reliant, wanting to use your own resources and not really lose self-esteem. And the third is, as I said, that we really don't have too much of mental health awareness in our country.
Right, right. I hope, Khichdi is on the menu tonight. I don't know if it is, but since you talked so much about family, I thought maybe, Mr. Piramal, you can tell us a little bit about how your family rallied around Aparna, how you got past the societal stigma of dealing with this condition.
So I must say that in our family, to a great extent, I think we have enough confidence in the family ourselves that we are not, if we think we are doing right, then it's not what we need for public to accept or not. So for instance, I know that from very, very early days, my brother, if you come from a traditional Marwari family, if you even go outside and get married to a non-Marwari, people will look at it. But he got married to a Gujarati, and it was like my father asked him to do it. So in all ways, I think we've never worried about what others think, as long as you think you're doing right. And that is why I think the credit has to actually go much more, I would say, to Aparna and to Amit, that they could accept this and speak about it. We are all, in some ways, we are family, but we are on the sidelines. It is these two who are really affected the most. Yes, her mom and her sister, but really day to day they are. And I think it's a great courage to do that. And I think, Aparna talked about vulnerability. According to me, you can only be vulnerable if you have self-confidence. Yeah. If you do not have, you'll never be vulnerable. And because you're vulnerable, I think it's a big strength, and the family rallies around you even more. So that's how I look at it.
Absolutely. I think you're a big source of confidence, and I know Amit and his family also are. Aparna, another thing about your title, and at this point I'm a little worried people are going to think I've only read the cover page and the title. But you talk about hacking mental health. You make it sound deceptively simple. Because I think what you do is actually something very deep. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. But really what you're doing is examining your life. You bring a radical transparency, but also authenticity and self-awareness. What were some of the therapies that you used that helped you do that? What were some of your learnings and unlearnings about sort of happiness, purpose in this journey?
I think one thing I'll say about this journey is I trusted a lot of people. I know people who've gone through a lot of trauma and all that, and they may not have trusted a lot of people. So I think only when we talk about vulnerability, only when you trust someone with your vulnerability, otherwise they don't know what's going on, right? So unless you tell them that you've got something going on, then you can receive a lot of help. So when you talk about this whole journey, then I got so much advice from people. I got different opinions, perspectives. So then you kind of pick and choose what really works for you, because then you have a lot of sources. It could get confusing also, but you do have a lot of perspectives to choose from. And I think, Richa, one thing I'm really blessed with is this gift of writing. Writing is really a gift. Yeah. Because if you have that, then you can bring a lot of rigor to your thinking as well as empathy. You know, especially I don't want to be kind of, and you're a millennial, so I don't want to be, disrespectful to millennials, but there's this whole thing about be kind to yourself, and take care of your mental health. And I think, of course, you should be kind to yourself, but be rigorous with yourself also.
Absolutely.
You have to have a mixture of rigor and empathy. And all my years of design thinking and interviewing CEOs like my uncle here have, made me kind of come to this with a perspective of rigor and empathy both.
Accept yourself and expect more from yourself.
Yeah, and understand and analyze, like really be honest with yourself as to let's say, whose approval are you seeking in life, at the end of the day? Who are you trying to make happy? So, and keep asking yourself those questions until you find an answer.
No, absolutely. And I think that leads me to another question for Mr. Piramal. So, Aparna, now you have a multi-hyphenated identity. But I know you struggled with identity a lot. Mr. Piramal, you have said in the past, my business is not my identity. I think it takes a lot of courage to say that. I think for a lot of people, their identity lies in that one elusive position or salary or material possession. How do we go about finding our identity and our sense of purpose in a world that's giving us such wrong cues? Material acquisition rather than sort of other kinds of spiritual fulfillment.
So I think we have to go to the basic. What is really the purpose of life? I mean, why does anybody live? Actually, it is that it is the pursuit of happiness. Even the US Constitution begins with the pursuit of happiness.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
But there is a difference in that pursuit of happiness and what our scriptures say. The happiness is not from outside. The happiness is from within. And therefore, for that happiness to be within, you have to have a heart which is full of love, full of happiness. And you have to seek it within. So even in identity, you have to look within, because your identity changes. Think of it, I mean, forget profession. You have an identity when you're growing up as an identity of being a child. Then you become a mother, then you become a wife, you become whatever. It is always changing. Or look at my own business. I had early on started as identity of textiles. That's right. But I gave up textiles. So, I mean, there are many people who at that time questioned me that why are you giving up textiles? That's your identity. But did I feel less because of that? No. Then I went into pharmaceuticals. I gave that up. I started something else. So identity is not determined by what outside is, what others think, but from within. And that is where spirituality as they call the Satchitanand, but that's the identity. And purpose is another big thing. I think you have to have a larger purpose in life than, okay, I will become a CEO or my wealth will become X or Y. The purpose has to be really doing well in life, doing good, and making a difference to the world. If you do not have that purpose, you will always fall short. And in identity, suppose today you're a CEO of you come on the cover of whatever business today, tomorrow you fail, you'll feel depressed. So it is all within. If you are strong within, through times you will go.
Absolutely. It's attributes and actions and not sort of an external thing. On a lighter note, I call you a serially successful entrepreneur for that reason. You've been in such diverse fields. Mr. Kinger, I'd love to interrogate that question of demand and supply a little bit more. Do people not go to psychiatrists because, you mentioned stigma and so forth, but how can we empower people to demand better care? And how can we improve the supply? How can we make sure that there are better resourced, better qualified medical professionals to help when we need it?
So my answer to that question is that actually, 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 5 Indians have a mental health condition. So that's 20% of your population. So there are 500 people over here. There's 100 people having a mental health condition. I don't know how many of them actually seek mental health treatment over here. That's one part. So one is that when people start seeking help or people start going to professionals, the need for excellence or the need to kind of improve the quality of services becomes an integral part of it. So I think it's very important that people accept that there's a mental health issue, and when they start seeking help, that will happen automatically. So for example, there's a classical example that many years back, we used to travel by trains, and aircrafts were few and far between. So the number of pilots in the country was very few. And today, with the airline industry growing, suddenly there's a huge number of pilots coming into the field. So if the demand for mental health services picks up, I think the excellence will also improve. The second part is, in India, unfortunately, we've been functioning more as individual islands of excellence. So there are a huge number of professionals who are exceptionally good at their work, but we all work as isolated individuals. And this whole thing of collective effort or working as a team is little less. So I think if that happens, I think there'll be a huge change in the situation.
Right. No, I think I have a slightly different take on demand and supply, only in that people don't have the ability to even seek the demand. I don't think they're kind of aware or have the resources to seek good care. So I think it's an unfortunate situation. Aparna, of course, you had the privilege to do that. It took you a while. But I'd love to talk to you a little bit about privilege. You acknowledged that early in the book, and throughout the book, you did that earlier this evening. You had the privilege of resources, you had the privilege of even time to address your condition and deal with it. How do you think people without that privilege can navigate their mental health journey?
Actually, I think there are some interesting models that are now being set up. So for example, I think what Mr. Kinger is doing is really amazing with a walk-in center for mental health in an industrial estate. I mean, we meet in an industrial estate in Mahim, where he's got a center where anybody can come in and, have therapy. Or for example, there's a rural model called Atmiyata, which is where the community is an expert in mental health itself, and the community has champions, and then, they help each other, and when there are situations that are more difficult, they escalate them. So I think then there is something like Therapize, which is also in the book, which is aimed at, not aimed only at young people, but really looking at making therapy very accessible to first-time therapy seekers. So I think there's actually quite a lot happening generally in this space when I started doing my research, but let's not kid ourselves that we have millions of people who have a problem. Yeah. So, all these little startups that are happening here and there, I don't know if it's, if it can really happen without a much, much bigger, scalable, sustainable. And I don't think there is one silver bullet, because what I've seen really is it took me 7 therapies, right? So, and somebody else may have 3, 4, 5, whatever they might have, different things that might work for them, but you need a kind of holistic perspective that is quite nurturing.
No, I think this is why your book is an act of service, because you list so many resources, and you've talked about, at length, about the various things that people can access, whether you want medical support or psychiatric, psychotherapeutic support or other kinds of things, apps even, not chatbots, but apps that can be helpful.
Yeah, I think just one thing I will say is that I don't see mental health as a distinct from life. I think this is what Mr. Kinger and I would both agree on. It is totally interwoven with life, okay? If you are poor, if you're struggling with unemployment, that's a mental health issue. Alcoholism, that's a mental health issue, right? Gender issues, domestic violence, these are mental health issues. So for just to sort of restrict it to a very narrow understanding or definition of the world.
I completely agree with what Aparna is saying. I think we have stages of life, right, from childhood to old age, and at different stages of life, you can have different mental health issues. So we have to take a lifespan approach rather than looking at specific illnesses and disorders. So I think that's the key over here.
And some of the biggest triggers are socioeconomic, right? So I think that there is that. But Mr. Kinger, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the work you do with Talk to Me? You're working with marginalized communities, and you're making mental health accessible to them. Tell us some of your learnings from that, and also tell us about what are the policy changes you'd like to see to make this more ubiquitous.
So thank you. I think this is a great platform Aparna has given all of us to talk about mental health. So I think a lot of people who are here should kind of become ambassadors for mental health. I'm looking forward to that. So when we started Talk to Me in 2017, and it took us 2.5 years to establish a physical center, that's just one center, but I think like Aparna said, there are millions of people across the country who need these kind of support systems.
Absolutely.
So, but the idea behind this was that I have experienced that a lot of people who cannot afford therapy, one of the key deterrents of not going for therapy, counseling, or seeking mental health treatment is because of lack of finances. So I think we took money out of the equation.
Wow.
So when you take money out of the equation, you're saying that you can come and see what we have to offer. The second thing was that we also created a model that there are people who don't want favors, right? So there are people who say, "Okay, I can afford 300 rupees. I can afford 500 rupees. So I don't want a favor, I don't want free service. I will pay." So we created a pay-as-you-can model.
Graded
so when
model.
so they don't feel obligated to us,
Yeah.
or they don't feel demeaned, they don't
Right.
feel that, we are taking, they are taking advantage of this. The third learning was that actually people think that you're just sitting in a chair and you're listening to them. But it's hard work, You sit in a chair for 12 hours or 8 hours and listening to people with different problems is not easy. So my third key learning was that as therapists, we also need to really take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
That's the third. And fourth, I think, is the community approach. I think just sitting in an office is not good enough. We need to reach out to the community. So we started doing projects outside with, say, juvenile delinquents, with the police, with orphanages, with women in rescue homes. Because I feel that, these are the key aspects which have been largely neglected. So we want to work with communities where if I work with one person, and there's a multiplier effect. So I work with one orphan, he gets a job, he takes care of himself, he has a family. So actually we are giving them a very positive take on life. So I think it's more about doing good and making sure that there's a multiplier effect of that.
Yeah, actually, I just want to talk about the multiplier effect. I also support an NGO called Kranti. I think some of them are here today. Honestly, anybody who thinks my story is great is should just go and listen to a Josh Talks on Kranti. Okay, these girls are daughters of sex workers. They have had incredibly horrific stories in their lives, and they are all rebuilding their lives, and therapy has been a huge part of it. So, it's because, and they're doing this by themselves. So I think these are just the incredible stories that you see in our city, and those are the ones that really need to be celebrated.
So I want to just add, your second part of the question was, what can we do?
Policy changes
or what policy
you'd
changes?
like to see?
I think mental health, first of all, should be made an integral part of insurance. So I think, just like you have physical health, insurance cover,
Yes.
mental health should be covered. I think that's a big lacuna in our system. That's one. The second thing, I think state and central government should definitely put in more money into it, which I think the process has started, but I think needs much more. And here is where individuals, corporates, HNIs come into the place. So when the government is not giving it, you do it for yourself. Because I feel that in every organization, if I'm saying that 1 out of 5 has a problem, and if you have 1,000 people working for you, there's 200 people with a mental health condition.
Right.
And if you work with them, the productivity, the profitability of the company goes up. So I think if companies and corporates start investing money, it will be a win-win for everybody.
Right. No, that's very valuable. And Mr. Piramal, we're going to kind of lean on you to get this message to the government to get policy changes started. But I'm just going to ask you and Aparna about gratitude. Gratitude is actually something that's deeply rooted in our spiritual tradition. It's about shedding the ego, having a sense of grace and a power larger than yourself, and shedding hubris. How does gratitude affect your sense of personal well-being?
First of all, I think we must recognize, sometimes we don't even appreciate why we should be grateful for. And I think during the pandemic in COVID, you realized, and I don't know how many of us realized it, but one of the biggest issues when the pandemic was at its peak was that you could not get oxygen. And so many people were struggling and passed away because of oxygen. Can you imagine the gratitude that we should have to the environment, that every second we are now breathing? So, these are small things, but look at it. To be born as a human being, if you believe in the whole reincarnation, then you need thousands of or hundreds of thousands of births to be born an individual, to born a human being. The fact that we have the power to discriminate, and we don't only do what an animal does itself is so much gratitude. And if we have that feeling of gratitude, a heart filled with gratitude, I think is happiness. Now look at Aparna's case. Somebody could have said to her, she would have said, oh, why has this happened to me? But she's, I think, grateful for what she's done. And therefore, she's a happier person. So gratitude leads to inner happiness. Gratitude leads to being humble. Humility. Because you know that you are there because of somebody else. And humility leads to devotion. And so I think in that sense, it's a very, very good thing. So that's how I believe. And there's so many things you have to be grateful for. Even in the worst of times, you are grateful for many, many things happening.
I'll just say that, I think when you're depressed, like there's a black hole, right?
Yeah.
And you need something, that ladder to help you come out of that black hole. And I think gratitude is that ladder because it's the beginning of finding a few steps out of that black hole because you can say, that I've got like something to be grateful for. So I think it may not solve the entire black hole, but it's the beginning of that ladder.
I think gratitude itself is a gift, the ability to feel gratitude. So one last set of questions for you, Mr. Piramal, and you, Mr. Kinger. I firmly believe this book is about much more than mental health. It's about happiness, purpose, and identity. Why do you think that people should read a book about bipolar? And what does happiness and success mean to you?
So I think the reason why you should read the book for bipolar is that it's really not on bipolar. I think that's what was explained by Aparna in the beginning. It's for all of us. And, all of us go through difficult times. I think there is nobody in the world, at least I know, who's not had challenges. If you tell me the most successful person, the most powerful person, everybody goes through it. And this just helps you to come out of a situation. How do you address it? You may not have bipolarity, but you may have some other issue. It's just like, as I said, the Gita. The Gita is there for all of us. You relate it to the way you want to relate it. So that, to me, is the reason why a book like this, comes out. And, look at Aparna, I have to say, thriving. If I look at Amit, her husband, look at her children. She's been able to bring up a really good family. So in spite of all the challenges, I think they're doing well. So that just shows that this book is meant for all of us.
So I think I largely, fully, completely agree with what he just said. So it may be a book about bipolar, but I think it's a life lesson. So when it's her struggle with her condition, and as Mr. Piramal was saying that each of us have certain struggles in our life, and we all need to understand. So when she spoke about taking help from somebody, leaning on a friend, reading Gita, spirituality, midnight calls, family support, children being a stress buster, I think these lessons apply to all of us. So I don't think it's just about bipolar. It's about trying to maybe look at all the positivity that we may have in our lives along with our difficulties. Okay, so most of us, the brain has a tendency to focus only on the negative.
That's right.
And we tend to downplay the positive. I think my lesson, I read the book, Aparna, by the way. So my lesson,
I also didn't just read the cover.
So she was sure I won't read the book, but I read the book. I think
You had a wedding in the family, so.
So the lesson, I think, is that we all need to learn from each other. And I really think it's a very, very wise book. So I think it's a great lesson for all of us.
Absolutely.
Thank you both of you.
We're out of time, but I'm going to, okay, if we had a rapid fire, the gift was going to be a dedication in Aparna's next book or a character being named after you. But we don't have any time for a rapid fire. So you have to name characters after.
We can do a rapid fire.
Okay, very quickly then. Mr. Piramal, one misconception about the Gita that you think is prevalent that you'd like to correct?
People think it's a book of a Hindu text. I think it's a universal text.
That's beautiful. And one lesson from the Gita, Aparna didn't tell us the shlok that changed her life. I have some idea which one it is, but one lesson from the Gita you want everyone to know.
I'm also going to be like Aparna. Go to the Gita, chapter 9, shlok 22. That is what has changed my life.
Okay, I know that it's on your office door as well, and Aparna has written about it as well.
No, so let me know. It's slightly different. So it really says that the Lord gives a guarantee, promise to everybody concerned that whoever is a true devotee, to that person I will protect what that person has and provide what that person needs. So if you have that belief, then through any difficulty you can go through, because he will protect you and provide you what you need.
That's really lovely. Is one attribute of Aparna or one lesson from her book that you want everyone to imbibe?
I think it is really how do you conquer, and don't be, really you can conquer any challenge and thrive. I think that is the main thing.
Absolutely. It's an epic story, just like Odyssey or the Mahabharata or
Not
something
epic.
like that. Right.
Not an epic.
And since we're in the Royal Opera House, one song that you think can calm the mind, or a bhajan that you think can calm a mind?
I mean, I believe in the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which is the simplest for anybody, and it is said that even if a dog hears it, that dog also gets calm. So
He pointed
I
you to
believe in
it.
that.
We had to
Aparna,
get a
in the book.
dog reference in.
If you talk about Apollo, then we have to talk about it.
Okay, Mr. Kinger, resources or awareness, what do you think is more critical for mental health?
At this point of time, awareness. Resources will come when awareness comes.
Great answer. Okay, celebrities talking about mental health, do you think that's good, or do you think that there should be a note of caution?
So honestly, I had mixed feelings about coming here because I thought people may think it's a PR exercise, but I think it's wonderful that if 500 people can take out time and come here, I think nothing better than that. So I think anybody and everybody
Well,
talking
I'm not
about
a
is important.
celebrity, I think.
I think that's what Aparna's takeaway from this was, that. But
More and more humble.
the gratitude is helping. And since you have read the book, one therapy or lesson from Chemical Khichdi that you would like to use with your patients?
Not losing hope. Making sure that, A, you accept that you're going through a difficult condition, connecting or reaching out to the person who can actually offer that help, and kind of staying with the positive mindset.
That's lovely. Okay, Aparna, this is a slightly controversial question, but I still want to know. Can a mental health condition be a superpower or a gift?
Yeah, you should now, I'll tell you more. You should read the most wise thing in my book, which is the letter from my childhood friend Hetal, and that will answer all your questions.
Penguin is going to be proud of you. Like, all answers are either in my book or in another book. Seek the source. Okay, one word to describe the writing process for you.
It gave me a lot of purpose. Not one word, but really it was imbuing purpose. It kept me going through the lockdown.
I thought the word would be catharsis, so I think it's quite
I don't think it was
similar.
cathartic. I think the poetry that I wrote was cathartic when I wrote it. The journal was cathartic when I wrote it. But I think writing the book was more an act of discipline and labor, but it gave me a lot of purpose.
Fabulous. That's beautiful. Okay, one thing that you have left out in the book that you'd like to tell us now, or something you could change about the book?
If I left it out, then I wouldn't share it now.
Tell us a secret.
That was a trick question.
Exactly. No, but also poetry or journalism, if you had to choose.
Poetry.
Wow. And since we're in the Royal Opera House, Lata Mangeshkar or Nina Simone?
Asha Bhosle.
Okay, that was lovely. You have to name a character after Dr. Kinger, after Mr. Piramal, and dedicate the book to, apart from sort of your family, dedicate it to yourself, I think, because it's a tie, three-way tie. Thank you so much.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.